one for dreamers who took that step.
I think Liz should start.
Here's
That's how
one
we should
for
begin.
every time they jumped without a net. Here's one for misfits who broke the rules, who feared the boredom more than scorn or ridicule.
And something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, what is it about our contemporary culture that we want to send the message that college is a place that you don't need to come to learn, right? Like when we talk about basic writing, and we all know the cultural pressures that are trying to push basic writing out of higher ed, why is it that we want to create a society where we want to send the message that you don't come to college to learn? Like if you have something to learn, you don't need to come here because we don't want to teach it to you. That seems to me a very odd and strange message that we would want to send in higher ed. I am currently studying, because I have so much free time, to be a dive master for scuba diving. And hopefully later I will be studying to be an instructor. But, you know, as with anything, when you are learning something new, or for me, when I'm learning something new, I often fail a lot of times when I'm starting out. And the very first pool session I had with my instructor, I'm really type A, anal A student. I get A's. I always get A's. If I don't get A's, then bad things happen. So we got in the pool, and I had to, when you are learning to be a dive master, it's not about whether or not you have a particular diving skill, it's about whether or not you have what's called demonstration level quality skills. Because you can't talk, like I can talk my way out of a paper bag, but underwater, when we are all breathing off of our regulators, I cannot speak. So how can it's been explained to me as if I am doing a ballet with my hands to show students what I want them to do. So the very first pool session, we went down, I was totally prepped, I had like really thought about it, and so we go down, we're in the pool, I do my first three things, and he writes fail. He had a slate, and he wrote my name and fail. My name and fail. I freaked out. Like, how could that be? And I retold the story to another friend of mine who is a dive master. I said, and he wrote it in red. And my friend said, no, he didn't write it in red. And I said, yes, he wrote fail in red, and it was terrible. He said, there are no red pens underwater. He wrote it in slate because that's what we used, and you're just thinking it was red because it was that upsetting to you. And he's right, it was not in red, and that was really funny. But here's the thing, in dive master training, I just do it again. And so the next time I did those skills, I got better. But I still didn't have the score that I wanted. So I went home and I practiced, and I went to the pool and I practiced, and I had some students that I practiced on, and then I was evaluated again. And now, like 4 months later, my skills are getting to the point where I'm getting the scores that I want, right? And I'm getting closer to where I want to be. But if that situation was me in a basic writing class, what would happen was I failed. If I was taking the Cat W, I failed. And the message is not try it again, not get better. The message is you fail. So the message is simultaneously, we don't want basic writing in higher ed because it doesn't belong here. Because, by the way, you didn't learn what you were supposed to learn before you walked through the door. And we don't actually want to teach you anything because you should already know that. And if we're going to condescend to include basic writing in our curriculum, we're going to give you the standardized tests. And if you fail, you fail because you're dumb and you fail. And we didn't actually want to teach you anyway. So move along because we want to deal with people who we actually want to teach. I mean, that's what we're saying. We're not talking about the fact that that's what we're saying. And I'm not saying that any of us in this room believe that. I'm not saying that anyone who teaches basic writing and is committed to it believes that. I'm saying that's the message of higher ed. So it seems to me that we're at this really weird time where our culture sends the message that college is a place you don't come to learn. College is a place you come to prove that you already know everything so that you can go get a job and make more money. That seems strange. The second thing that it makes me think about is these questions of, are we actually actively shaping our curriculum, or is it being shaped for us? And if it's being shaped for us, who is shaping it and why? And what do we have to do about that? What do we want to do about that? What can we do about that? And in some cases, I mean, the answer is different in every case, but I spend a lot of time thinking about that because I actively teach basic writing. Basic writing is one of my favorite courses to teach. At LaGuardia, we all teach everything. I like teaching everything, but I spend a lot of time teaching basic writing. It's where my heart is, but my heart is not in the Cat W. And my heart is not in the Cat W. And over again, as my students and I are wrestling with it, I think, why am I spending time teaching this, and what is it preparing them to do? What am I actually preparing them to do? I think this has a lot to do with the cultural pressures that are on us around money, around the economy, around assessment, on what's going on in K through 12, technology, diversity, internationalization. We could make lists and lists and lists of things that are the cultural pressures, but it all comes back to the same question. What are the shifting roots of our curriculum? When I started to study basic writing with Pamela in my very first class, and then I went on to have more experiences with her, more classes with her, it was really about social justice. Teaching basic writing was about access, and was about my commitment and learning the roots of all the amazing people who were these amazing pedagogues who I studied, who believed that the classroom is a place to shape social change and to shape the society that we have. But right now, that I don't mean that you might be doing that individually in your own classes, and I'm working really hard to try and do that in my classes, but that's not what basic writing is doing nationally. That's just not what we're doing. So what are the shifting roots of that curriculum, and what does it mean? I think that's really an important question to ask. Technology, for me, fits into that very much, as does ALP, because they are both avenues that are allowing us to shape the curriculum and to, I think, live in the contemporary moment where we are trying to interrupt all of that. But I don't know how successful we are in interrupting it. I don't know in the future how successful these strategies will be, but they're things I think about a lot. But I also promise you that as we think about the future of basic writing, a couple years ago at 4Cs, Kelly Ritter made up these awesome buttons that said, who is basic writing? And then I am basic writing, right? So you would wear one in one place and one on another place on your backpack. And it was cool because people were wearing them all overseas. But the thing is, there are always going to be basic writing students. They're not going away just because we push them out of higher ed or we put them in adult and continuing ed. There are always going to be students who need basic writing. It's just a question of what it's going to look like and where it is.
I think that the short answer to the question, shouldn't we keep some full developmental education sections for students with more profound instructional needs? I think the short answer is yes. I think that we find that in the accelerated learning program, it doesn't serve the needs of every student. I think that is just a truth. What concerns me is then how do we serve them? Because it is proving to be the most effective way to get basic writing students, and I can talk a little bit about why I think that is true. And if that isn't working, then what is it that's going to make a difference? I think this remains my biggest concern, and I'm trying to figure out, again, the phrase I'll use is move the needle. We tried to create another class for the people with the very lowest scores that they would go in, and I was given that class to teach, so it wasn't just basic writing, it was really basic writing.
Basic.
And,
basic square.
And of course, what I loved about it was there was no CAT at the end. I mean, ACT at the end. ACT. Sorry, I've lost it for a while. Those names, but I loved it because I just taught them how to write, and we just did free writing, and we did drafts and drafts and drafts, and we read things, and it was just the greatest thing ever because I didn't have a test to worry about at the end. It was so. We had this wonderful experience, but we found that students who took the 2 levels of remediation, so it was our 98 and 99, if they took the 98, their pass rate for the 99, the basic writing, was only 6% greater. It was higher, but 6%, any statistician is going to laugh at you with that number, right? I was stunned by how much work was being done by dedicated, hardworking people to get students past this ACT test, and they were failing at it continually. The students were continually, our pass rates were so low. They were just continually in the 40s and the 50s. Like we were just these, so people with PhDs and dedication and hard work and students who are desperate, and we could not get our pass rates up. We just couldn't do it. It was really demoralizing. And
All right. So how many of you use technology in your everyday lives? How many of you write with technology? How many of you struggle with learning how to write with technology and figure things out, like how to annotate a PDF, or when you're reading a digital textbook, what to do with that? So why are these not things that we want to talk about with our basic writing students? Instilling in them from the very beginning the idea that writing and writing with technology is a skill and a process, just like every other way that we talk about writing. So my second semester of graduate school, I was required to take a course called Teaching Composition, which I took with Pamela Gay, who's one of my big mentors and who I absolutely adore and love. And this was really pretty early on in computers and composition. And she taught the whole thing. I mean, we were still using the computers that had like the green screen, okay. So then I went on to work with Pamela in doing writing across curriculum stuff at Binghamton. I went on to do my work in EOP and was really interested in questions of diversity in the classroom, questions of basic writing and access. And for me, it was really about access and diversity and basic writing from the get-go. That was really where my love and my heart was. So fast forward, I end up at LaGuardia. So I was assigned to teach my courses in a computer lab because they thought I would know what to do with the computers. And I walked into my first semester at LaGuardia and I was in a computer lab for every single solitary class. So I immediately left after the first day of teaching, went home and called Pamela and said, you are not possibly going to believe the irony of like where I am and what's going on. And so Pamela and I did a lot of back and forth. She really helped me greatly that semester think about all the things I was super passionate about in my career and in my teaching, and then how was that gonna work out in this computer classroom. During that semester, the thing that I really learned that I had not learned at Binghamton was that my students actually didn't know what to do with the computers. I mean that very sincerely. That was in 2000. It was 2000. And they didn't know. They didn't know. They knew how to turn them on. They knew what they were. They certainly didn't have them. Almost none of my students had them. I had a laptop, and I mean, in 2000, laptops were still, like carrying around Shakespeare volume. And I really had to do some thinking about my political desire to make sure that basic writing students had access and what technology meant. And how were my students going to be successful in a world where they didn't know how to use Microsoft Word? Well, they didn't know how to use the internet. Well, they didn't know how, and it just kept going and going and going. It seemed like every year, and then like every 6 months, and then like every 3 months, there were all of these new technologies that were putting pressures on our society writ large and on the classroom and on culture. So fast forward to where I am today, I do think that teaching with technology is an imperative. I think that it is our responsibility, not to teach them everything about technology from beginning to end, but the ways in which technology intersects with our discipline. And it intersects in many, many ways. From this morning in my class, we were having conversations yet again about how to attach a file. I mean, attaching a file to an email is about the simplest thing that you can do. And yet for some, certainly not all, but for some of my students, that's a challenge. How many times are they going to have to perform that simple task at work, at home, right in their lives? How often are they going to have to do that? And if I'm not going to take the time in the classroom to explain it, where are they going to learn it? Right? I mean, and it impacts their grades in my class. So it's a worthwhile piece of the curriculum. So you have basic writing at that level. But then you have basic writing and technology at the other level, and that is for those of us for whom basic writing is very much a political and social commitment around access. Do we not then also have a responsibility to think about how to shape our curriculum in concert with questions like, what does it mean to write a Facebook profile, and what does it mean that the NSA is mining that data when our students don't even know who the NSA is? right? Like, how do we help them to become digitally literate? How do we help them to become digitally literate and to be confident citizens who are able to engage in all of the questions of our culture? And I think it has to start with not only how do you write an effective project, not necessarily paper, unless you're writing the Cat W, in which case it does have to be a paper, and how do you use and shape this technology as a user, not be used by that technology. So that's my opening salvo. I'll pass off to you.
Oh my God.
You said you could have gone first.
It's true. I handed it over.
You handed it over. You knew what you were walking into.
So I came to LaGuardia 3 years after Liz did, and I had come from, by way of, I did my PhD at SUNY Stony Brook and had worked with Pat Belanoff, but...
Yay, SUNY.
Yeah.
SUNY represent.
But because I did not, my area of study was not Comp Ret, but I was very immersed in it. However, getting to LaGuardia was the first time I ever walked into a basic writing classroom and suddenly had to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. Fortunately, I had some Comp Ret background, and so I felt confident in, I had been doing that for 10 years by the time I got to LaGuardia, but still acknowledging who basic writers are, and this is a really important population, became a really something that I think has defined who I think of and what I think of myself as. Working with basic writers. As far as technology goes, I mean, even at Stony Brook, we were introduced to, teaching with technology. So I felt like I had some tools and some basic ability. And then coming to LaGuardia, I think it was probably the very first faculty, like welcome to LaGuardia opening fall thing, where the president stands up and talks about how wonderful the college is, and what she presented was e-portfolios. And I suddenly saw a way to represent students in ways that went far beyond what their academic record would show. And that seemed really important to me. That was before I stepped into a basic writing classroom. So even before I was working with basic writing students, I still thought, there's so much more to students, and we don't, than GPAs, and how do we represent that, especially in a system of students who are socio and economically disadvantaged. How can we represent them? And so I spent 9-10 years working with e-portfolios and trying to figure out how they would work for me. And the article I wrote was primarily about that again, failures. There's plenty of failures in there. You try something, you see what works, how this is best going to represent your students. I still find, as Liz was saying, in my classrooms, as I'm sure you all find too, that you have students who are quite savvy, but I still have, one of the things I continue to struggle with, and all my best strategies do not take care of, helping students understand representing themselves for audiences, especially in social media. It's a continual challenge to try to talk to them about how they represent themselves to different audiences, and that's very important. But I agree with Liz that their lives are saturated by it, and we do a disservice if we don't acknowledge that and talk to them kind of about that. And help them to understand, as she put it so well, how to use the technologies to not be used by it, right? Because that's something that they're dealing with. And so I got to teach my own lab, and so I said, all right, during that lab, how about we try to do this, students go at their own pace and go through these grammar modules. And it sounded so smart, and it sounded like it might just work. And of course, it was disastrous from beginning to end. Like, I had the representative, he was very kind and very eager, and he came the first couple times to make sure they could kind of all get on and get everything, because again, that isn't a given. And the first day he didn't show up, then there were people who couldn't get on, and somehow couldn't make it work. And even though I would tell them, I am monitoring your progress, I'm seeing, you're taking these pre-tests and you're working the module, they still didn't do the modules. That was really sort of amazing to me. I had this whole really conviction in my mind that teaching grammar outside of a context was a bad idea. But, I got dazzled by the technology for a minute. And so I said, okay. And in the end, they were not any stronger writers because of it. They, in no way did it improve. I think what would be very nice, and, no publishing company is going to pay for this, but I think we need to do some quantitative tests about this and to kind of look at the progress. What are these really, they sell it as if, English teachers are so happy about this, professors are so happy about these programs. I'd love to see some research, some actual, how does this affect student writing, what are the measurements we're doing, etc. I just haven't seen much on that, and I think we need to study this before we go down that path for certain.
Yeah. Well, and there are questions at the CBW pre-conference workshop at 4Cs this year. One of the panels was on sort of who owns the curriculum. Right, these questions of in what ways, if you buy into a prepackaged program, is the curriculum being flattened, and in what ways is basic writing being defined by publishing companies as grammar? I mean, frankly, many of the technological innovations that are out there are simply a dazzly, sparkly, magical version of the workbooks that students used to fill out that are how to write a sentence, which is not my definition of what basic writing is, and is not really any basic writing teacher I know's definition of basic writing. So there is that also that pressure of technology on the curriculum where, it's easy. And many schools have gone that route because it's really easy to add it on, and it's cheap and it's fast and it's, it's standardized, and it's going to be the same from section to section. I mean, imagine how magical that would be for CUNY, if when you have a writing program and you have 80 sections of basic writing, what the students are studying in every section is exactly the same. Only what is it that they're studying? What is it that they're able to do at the end? What is it that we want them to be able to do? And I think those are questions that we don't talk about. I think there are assumptions about what basic writing is that are being made for us as faculty, and we are not being included in that conversation often. And that is certainly also something around the future of basic writing that concerns me and has nuances with technology that concerns me greatly.
It. But again, to me, it goes to this idea that of creating some kind of work that represents, again, a whole student, not just this one academic moment, this particular class where you're doing this activity, which I understand is what I'm grading. I understand that's my responsibility. However, I feel like, my favorite essays to read are the one where they get to tell me something about them, rather than only, reporting what other people have said, putting together the researched argument, and they feel so much like they can't have a voice there. And the e-portfolio, because it is about them, and they're constantly, I think because they can access their reflective pieces so much more easily, perhaps that's where the reason that it speaks to their voice so much more easily.
I'm just finishing an article on selfies and the relationship of selfies to then ePortfolio. And so in that article, which is not really yet finished, kind of finished, I think there's going to be another revision. I'm kind of grappling with this idea that when we talk about self-representation, there's a lot of discussion in our culture right now with selfies. I'm sure you know that Oxford's word of the year was selfie, in fact, which was so great. They announced that in December as my first draft of the article was due. I was like, yes. So I spent some time talking about the fact that selfies are really kind of interesting because they're the ultimate tool of self-presentation for an audience, right? They're this carefully constructed moment of how do I look, where am I, what am I doing, and what am I conveying to you? And the ePortfolio, for me, is a place where we can really start to break that down, because I'm not interested in the carefully constructed moment. I'm interested in how it all goes together. So how does that carefully constructed moment, where you look fabulous at your prom or in your wedding dress or whatever, and you take a selfie, connect to the fact that you ended up in basic writing, connect to the fact that you used to be a lawyer in Columbia, and the only reason you're in basic writing is because you've moved to the United States and fell in love, got married, and now this is your life, right? And how does that connect to the fact that 4 years later, you end up at Vassar, right? I mean, it's all connected when you look at the story of a student. And so for me, that question of voice really comes in helping them narrate those connections. It's not in the single assignment, it's in how they make sense of all those different moments from moment to moment to moment, and what that says over time. So really echoing what Heidi said, it's really about the integrative self, and that sort of, getting to the question of the gestalt, right? Like, what is it to be whole when you look at your academics and your personal life? And I think that's something that often our students don't have time to think about, because they're running from thing to thing to thing, and each academic moment is siloed. But the ePortfolio breaks that open, so students really have to think about, oh, well, I had to study this, but here's what I was interested in, and here's how that connects to this experience. And so we really hear them in a different way than in that faux academic voice that we all know oh so well, because you've written papers in that voice. Some of you are working on dissertations in that voice. Some of you have written dissertations in that voice. And it's important for them to wrestle with that voice. They need to know that voice to be successful in academia. They need to be able to mimic that and do that. But they also need to be able to write and speak in other ways.
Yeah.
And I think
So does that resonate for you as a connection with what was just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the, a continual question I ask my students is, I try to ask them at least once a week, so just write me, in a free write, a focus free write. What did you learn this week? And how do you know you learned it? Like, what does learning really mean? What does this really mean to have learned something? And if you haven't learned anything, why haven't you learned anything? Is there something that's preventing the learning, or did you already know this? This is just a repetitive, or they need to kind of understand what learning is. I feel like I went through most of my college career, and suddenly I was getting a PhD and had never stopped to think about how I had progressed as a writer, as a human being, as just went from place to place to place, and because people kept passing me, thought I was succeeding, and I don't know that I knew what that meant. And I think to force my students to stop and consider just the journey from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester is not a small thing for them. I think it's really how many of you are familiar with the Accelerated Learning Program? A few of you are. So let me just tell you a little bit about it. What it tries to do is, again, take students who would test into a basic writing class and take a smaller group of them, 10 at LaGuardia. This is the number we work with. So we have 10 students who have tested as basic writers. They come to a composition, a Comp 1 course, with 12 other students who have tested into Comp 1, right? Either they passed basic writing themselves, or they just took the CAT and they have landed in first year composition. So they meet together at LaGuardia, it's 4 hours for composition. They are with those same students. They do the same assignments. In addition, they come for 3 extra hours with the same instructor, just those 10 students, to meet with the instructor and to get extra support. The extra support across the nation looks like it's a lot of help with, they support the classroom assignments for the first year writing course. They talk about affective issues, meaning everything that happens outside the classroom, right? Again, bringing the outside into and talk about, okay, so you weren't here the past couple times. Do you want to talk about what's going on in your life? Is there something that we can do to help you? Is it a financial aid issue? Maybe we should all go over, or have someone from financial aid come to our class and talk to us. They spend a lot of time talking about that, and or talking about time management, that old gem. Talking about helping students just get through, how do you plan so you have enough time to do all the work that you've been given. Things that students really absolutely need. So that's where their focus is everywhere else around the nation.
I think the accelerated learning program model is great. I'm teaching in it. I'm teaching actually both versions. I teach the 1 hour, we call it ENC course, and I teach the ENA, which is our out version, and both are very effective and frankly very subversive because they allow students to bypass some of the restrictions that the basic writing course imposes on them within CUNY. That said, if basic writing were credit bearing, I still think it's an important model. The problem is when it's not credit bearing, that creates all sorts of roadblocks for our students that I don't want to do.
Our department was happy with the idea of piloting this, and so we
Which was
ran
amazing.
Yeah. We ran with it, and it's been, and it really has been kind of a big change. For example, after, what semester are we in? We're in after, I have statistics for 5 semesters. Again, at the CAT rate, the pass rate that we're getting is again about 25% higher than those who are taking our basic writing classes. So that's a lot more than 6%, right? That's just, it's a whole lot more. We're doing, doing much greater work and helping students in these bigger, larger ways. And these same students, I don't think anyone will be surprised to hear, they're passing they're fulfilling their 101 requirements at a rate that's not that far off from those who are in the Comp 1 courses, right? I mean, like the statistics are really small. Our pass rate for the Comp 1 is 74%, and for regular first-year compositions, there's a 79. So it's within 5. Again, that small, very small percentage. So the students who, again, anyone who's worked with basic writers are perhaps not surprised to hear that the students who are these basic writers in these courses are often better students. They're often better writers if you give them time and give them a chance to draft and actually go through the writing process. So I feel like the reason that the accelerated learning program works is because it is, in fact, teaching writing in a context that isn't a standardized test. This, sit down for an hour and a half and write an essay that people that you've never met will read and tell you. There's a context. There's some basic in the teaching of the larger issues of composition, you get into the whole writing process and you get a chance to talk about the whole writing process. I just feel like that makes all the difference in how students understand and receive the instruction for writing, period. I think that's what makes the difference. I do believe that the acceleration, the big change here was an institutional change. It was in the acceleration itself, not necessarily in one instructor just being that much of a better instructor. I do think it's the model itself and the way the course is arranged. And I think that it took that kind of huge so the institution has to commit money to this kind of the way we teach it for it to work. Of course, if you teach in CUNY, what you teach, of course, is how to pass the damn catwalk. So that's what we spend a lot of time doing. We have to spend some of our time doing that. But the difference is I don't have to spend all my time doing it. And when I do, again, it's this kind of, it just seems much, of course, when I was teaching basic writing, I would always talk about how these skills transfer to these larger skills. But in this accelerated learning program, it is immediate because we're doing an essay that employs these other skills. So when we talk about drafting or brainstorming, we'll talk about it in terms of a CAT essay, sure, but we also talk about it in terms of the essay that I'm asking you to write about discourse communities and that kind of thing. So it just seems more immediate and therefore more helpful. This was Kathleen DeVore from Minneapolis Community and Technical College. She said, accelerated pedagogies are meeting needs of highly motivated basic writing students. But the thing I like about the accelerated learning program is that we work very hard to take all basic writing students. We really do try to take them. again, with a score starting at 36 up to, 55. Not that the lower scores necessarily are going to pass, but the movement in their scores is quite tremendous. So it's just, again, I just want to say that I don't think it's just for highly motivated students. I do think it really is for a larger swath of the population. Having started with the idea that, yes, of course, there are some students it doesn't work for. We have found so far, again, only 6 semesters now, or 8 semesters that we've been doing this. Students with severe second language issues, sometimes this is not the course for them. They need more time. They just need a little bit longer time. It seems acceleration doesn't. They usually are the ones that write very, very well when they're given the chance to revise. They're the ones with the really good learning habits, so they're the ones that go to the writing center every single week, and they're the ones that, so again, when I give them the 3 weeks to write an essay, they're the ones that they're getting B's and high B's and A's, but then they can't sit down and write this cat essay, so to me, highlighting one of the many flaws of this essay in the first place. Okay, so, the second part of this, it says that acceleration also looks like the way to end developmental ed that so many administrators and legislators are pining for. I do think that's the case. I think that this is the dream of so many administrators and legislators. I think that's exactly right. Can we do this faster? Can we get rid of this problem quicker? Can we, this is a worry. But like Liz was just saying, I do feel like here's a space for us to kind of make our pedagogical choices, and it is much more linked to the overall teaching of composition than so many other models. One of her questions is, are we losing ground here as basic writing as a credit-bearing course? And I think yes, the answer is, right, the acceleration model, the one thing that it does hurt us with is trying to credit-bearing for basic writing courses. But what it does, and this is why other administrators love it, I have a student in my class right this semester who she's taking a college level, because she's taking this course, the college allows her to register for a critical thinking, another college level course that she couldn't do if she was stuck in basic writing hell, right? Until you get out of that, she's stuck there. Because of this course, it allows her to take these other courses and to prove herself there, and she's doing very well in that course. So, that's another thing that the program does. It does require more commitment from administrators because it is more expensive to run. We are very lucky that that dean of students that I was talking about before became the provost, and he really believes in the program, and he goes out seeking for that money for us. So I don't have to go and write those grants and try to get that money. The English department doesn't have to do that. He does that for us, and we just benefit from it. I've talked to many other people and other programs as they try to get these going. They are fighting with administrators to try to make it work. I don't think it can work without having that kind of support.
The second thing that I want to say is, if any of you who are currently in your PhD programs have any room for an elective, I would strongly encourage you to take an economics course or a statistics course or something having to do with that stuff that's on that board there that we don't actually know how to do with. Because one of the questions, I find that continually, one of the things that we come up against are issues of policy and money. Issues of policy and money, policy and money. It's always very easy to romanticize things in the past where you're not dealing with whatever the pressures are at the moment. But when I think back on my work at Binghamton, where I was really trained as a rec comp instructor, the program that I taught in for EOP worked with the students who were most at risk at Binghamton, who came in, who were not college ready at Binghamton, despite Binghamton's academic requirements. It was a different program. And they came in, and the students had a 6-week summer program that was learning communities, that was team taught. It was taught by all graduate student instructor, and a graduate student tutor. So I started out as a tutor in the program, and then I became an instructor. So as a PhD student, I had another student who was either a beginning PhD student or an MA student who was the tutor for my class, and we taught classes of 12 basic writers in a learning community with a content level course, so introduction to sociology or whatever, taught by a graduate student who also had a tutor. And the four of us met every single solitary week with the coordinator of the EOP program to talk about every student in our course. And is it a surprise that those students did well? Is it a surprise that we got them through? Not just got them through, we got them through well. They also lived in the dorms. Oh, we did all of the tutoring in the dorms. We had mandatory tutoring every night in the dorms. You were not getting away. If you didn't show up for your tutoring, I went up to your room. And I was like, hi, it's time for tutoring and you're wasting my time. And you're here to learn, so let's go. And if they still wouldn't come, their RA would go get them, right? And there was no escape. And in the evenings and in the mornings and at breakfast, there would be programs about how to be successful in college, about financial aid, about time management, about dealing with family pressures. I mean, we would have whole weeks where we would talk about what does it mean that you're here and your family is at home and you're going to go home a different person. They're going to see you differently. And they're going to, what does that mean? And how are you going to deal with that? By the way, here's all of last year's students and the students before that and the students before that who are here in the dorms with you as peer advisors who already know the answers to those questions because they were you 4 years ago or 3 years ago or 2 years ago, right? Then, when they were done with that 6-week program and they then started their freshman year at Binghamton, guess what? Weren't done. Then they came to me for their next level of basic writing and I saw them again, right? And again, they were in a learning community where for their first semester in college, I was their instructor and I had a tutor. And they were in a learning community with another graduate student, right? And we met during the semester every single solitary week to talk about every single solitary student, right? And they succeeded. Where's the money go? Our basic writers pay tuition, right? Their tuition is exactly the same as every other student's tuition within CUNY. And it's about how we make choices about where the budget goes and how that money says what we value. It's not that there's not money. It's that the money goes to different places, right? And it's that the money sends a message that they don't care. The problem is that myself and many of us in the humanities, frankly, are not prepared or sophisticated enough to make the kind of economic arguments that you need to be at the table to make. So if you can, in the future of basic writing, you should study economics so that you can do that work because it would be a really phenomenal contribution to the field. And it's something that somebody like Peter Adams, who started the ALP program, Peter is amazing at doing that. It's one of his many talents and something that I admire greatly. So I think we should open up for conversation.
Okay. Questions?
So what do you got?
Thoughts?
We talked for a really long time.
We've gone 10 minutes past, so we've eaten up our time. This was such a wonderful talk. There's so much here to think about and take away. Thank you so much, both, for coming. And,
Thanks for
and
inviting
telling
us.
all this.
Thank you.
Thank you for the tea.
Thank
you.
Pleasure.
Coffee.
We're gonna have to do a workshop over the summer. And Jennifer and I already have a fairly big shared Dropbox folder with like everything we organized. What it doesn't have is